here as last week, but there are an awful lot of people here tonight who were not here last week. So we will go through the budget. We'll ask Mr. Craig and Mrs. Ante, our Chief Financial Officers, to present the budget in general overview form, and then we'll move on with the rest of the process. Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Ante.
Thank you. As Mr. Belt pointed out, this is the second of our two required public hearings regarding our 2011 budget. Budgets are due in the state of Alabama this fiscal year on September 15th. That due date varies depending on what the state legislature requires. It can be as early as early August down now to September 15th. This year is September 15th. We're going to go through the required format, which is what was in the handout at the front of the required reports that the state has us present to you in this hearing. We'll also provide you with some information regarding the state of the school district and where we are, and some background information as to how we came up with our budget. The budget is really a tool. We do not have an appropriation budget, so by things being approved in this budget does not mean an appropriation or an expenditure is approved. It means that a plan for the financial operation of the school district is being approved. It, like any other plan, is based on estimates and projections and information that's really gathered across the whole district. We receive input from our schools, from our different departments, and other groups associated with the schools, including our PTOs and PTAs, provide their budgets to us that get rolled up into our overall district budget. This does follow the premise of site-based management, which is what we use to operate our schools. The purpose for this is that the financial resources are the persons that are responsible for making sure those objectives happen are also the persons responsible for the financial resources connected with those different responsibilities. We began the budget process really in the spring when we hold school and departmental staffing. Each principal and each department meets with a team of district administrators to collaboratively determine staffing for the upcoming school year. Generally, by mid-April, about 86% of the general fund budget has already been determined. So the primary piece of the budget has been determined by that time, based on how we staff. Principals and department heads, as I mentioned before, submit their budgets for non-payroll expenditures. During June, federal programs, budgets for federal programs are completed as the information becomes available from the state via the federal funding source. In looking at our expenditures, our revenues, these are big old letters. We are expecting proration in 2011 based on the best information that's come forth from the State Department to be 3 to 5%. We don't know what it will be. That's just the best guidance that we've heard from the State Department. The unfortunate part about it is we can't consider that when we look at our budget. We have to budget the state funds as the state has allocated to us currently. So we can't say, well, they're going to give us X, but they're going to reduce it by 5%. We have to budget the whole amount. So that's what you'll see here. Our ad valorem receipts are budgeted to decrease by 3% from 2010. We've also included in this budget $2.5 million of education jobs funds. These are those funds that were just recently approved in Congress that were distributed out to the schools, to the states, and then ultimately to the schools. Our state chose to allocate them in the same format and formulary that they used to allocate general foundation funds. They had an option of having them come out in their state funding formulas or connected with title programs, and our state chose to do it based on the state funding formula. We've also included $4.6 million of ARRA funds, which those were the Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds that were first available to us in small parts in 2009 and then through the bulk of 2010. These funds will end at the end of this fiscal year. With the termination of that program. What that, and I know we're talking about 2011 budgets, but we need to look forward into 2012 because our outlook for 2012 is somewhat bleak. As you heard, we talked about there's still more proration to come potentially in 2011. We have several sources of revenue that are one-time sources. Just those one-time sources would mean a loss in revenue for us in 2012 of $7.1 million. So this is our cautionary tale of we're not over the economic slump as yet. We still have more to go. We're continued, at least I personally continue, to be very concerned about property values and the impact on ad receipts. We actually came out pretty well in 2010, but I'm sure that at some point some of these declining values in properties will work their way through the assessment process into what we get as a receipt. Sally Cowles, Executive Director of the Alabama Association of School Board Officials, she was quoted in a recent article in Fortune magazine about the state of funding of education in Alabama. And, you know, she's really talking about, in that quote, as you can read, the funding cliff that we're going to reach in 2012. I think as you see as we go through this, we have done many things within our district to year. So that's very, very limited amounts of funds there. Here's a look at how the foundation program has gone since 2006. Our base, what we received for example, what we received for the 2011 fiscal year is based on what our student enrollment was in 2009, in the beginning of school, in the 2009-2010 school year. So if you're growing in your school, in your children, you're always going to be behind in what you get as far as your revenue coming in. But you can see how the average revenue per student has been declining from 2008. 2008 was one of the higher years on record for state funding per pupil for us. And if we include, this number includes proration in 2010, and if we include proration in 2011 the way it's anticipated, it will probably be at that same level or slightly more for this next school year. Our ad valorem, this is a summary of our ad valorem from 2004 through 2010 for our receipts. 2005 was the first year when we went on annual reappraisal, so it's really the first comparable year. And you can see in 2010 we wound up almost flat with 2009. We're only down $164,000. That's why I've got a growing concern about what's going to happen next year and the next year, because at some point some of these declining property values are going to have to figure into that, to the assessment, and then ultimately into the receipt equation for us. So that is a reduction of almost $2 million this year. Here's our revenue by source. We're budgeting for 2011 an increase in revenue of about $5 million, coming in from an increase in foundation, what we're receiving from the state because of our increase in units, as well as the $2.5 million in education jobs, offset by that decline in ad valorem receipts that I just mentioned. We work out to where we've got about 39% of our total revenues coming in from local sources compared to 38% in the prior year. So we're relatively balanced. What's unusual for us is this large, almost 8% of our total revenue budget coming in from federal. In years prior to 10 and 11, when we didn't have the benefit of the ARA funds, that number was a much smaller percent of our total revenue. Mr. Craig, where do you want to jump in? Okay. We're going to take a look at expenditures. When we began budgeting for and looking at our expenditures, one of the places where we turned in order to make sure that what we were doing, while painful and not always what we would want to do or what we would choose to do, was in concert with what we thought overall our community would want us to do directionally with guiding the school district these economic downturns, we look towards the things and values that came out of our funding task force. Our funding task force was a group of, I can't remember the number now, 25, 30 community, people from the community that we brought together and talked about different issues that were important to the school, and to both at an individual school level, at an elementary school versus secondary school. They weren't really charged with help us get through this current economic downturn. What they were charged with was really to help us recommend actions and give us things and ideas to provide capability to provide the quality of education that our citizens wanted. We knew we were being faced with tough choices, and we knew that we needed to hear what the community was interested in and valued. As I said, we broke up into different groups, and I'm just going to run through these quickly. Some of the things that came out of the groups gave us much feedback, and we value all of it, and we used a lot of it in going through and making choices and decisions. These are just some of the highlights, and certainly not representative of the total body of work and effort that those folks put into that exercise. One of the things that came out of the elementary group was that, they valued art and music. And that was a thing that went across all of our discussions, both elementary and secondary, and even when we look at from our parent survey information that's come out, you can see that thing, they value that breadth of offering. Even if it means larger class sizes, they understand if you have to give and take, we value the breadth. So we took that into consideration. We looked at divisors when we were going through class size divisors, when we were going through staffing. We talked about part-time positions. We are trying to work those in for practicable. We talked about split grades. We talked about that staffing. I don't think we wound up doing any of that, but we talked about it. We did. We got one. So those are some of the things. Secondary, there again, it was that concentration on what makes Hoover City Schools, and it was going to be Hooverness, and that really centered around the breadth of offering, the way to adequately prepare students to go for their life after their fundamental educational experience. And that was where we looked at the concept of teacher-student load. How many kids can you put in the classroom before it's not, they lose that ability to have that experience that we value within our school district. We use that load data when looking at staffing at the secondary level. There again, they talked about part-time positions. They also talked about the concept of a flexible senior release program that we've introduced at Hoover High School this year, which helps us in some other areas that we'll come to talk about, but it does help help manage some of that load issue. Administrative aids and extracurricular subgroup. We talked about, and they talked about many things in that group. One of them was to align assistant principals with SAC standards. This would mainly occur at the elementary school level. And we looked at that, we talked about it, but said, well, maybe there's a way we can kind of change the task and what the responsibilities of an assistant principal are, still be able to maintain them in our schools, and get and cover and still garner some savings for the school district. Clerical staffing, we looked at that when we went through staffing in the spring. They talked about board pay benefits, and they suggested we have the employees pay a portion of dental. We really didn't want to have to change any of our board pay benefits for our employees this year. We thought it was trying enough times as it is, and until we absolutely have to, we didn't want to do that. But we went out and renegotiated all of our board pay benefits, and were able to save close to well over $100,000 in that through that negotiation. So we thought that was a good trade-off, where that was a thing that the task force said. The task force says those benefits are important to the employees. We agreed and found another way to get some of the same savings that were